Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring the topic of Dreamtime. My guest is Gary Lachman, formerly a songwriter and bass guitarist for the rock band Blondie. He is one of the world's foremost historians of esoteric culture. He's been interviewed 11 times previously on the New Thinking Aloud channel on topics including Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, Emanuel Swedenborg, P.D. Ouspensky, Colin Wilson, Aleister Crowley, Hermeticism, Carl Jung, chaos, magic, and Russian mysticism. His newest book, about which we'll be discussing today, is Dreaming Ahead of Time, Experiences with Precognitive Dreams, Synchronicity and Coincidence. Gary is based in London, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Gary. What a pleasure to be with you again after a pause of about a year.
Yes, I'm very happy to be back on the show, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
You took advantage of the pandemic to write yet another book about your own personal experiences with precognitive dreaming, which I know is a long-standing interest of yours, even, I think, going back to your days as a musician.
Yes, this is a very personal new book for me, and it is fundamentally about these strange future dreams that I started recording in 1980. But even before then, as you mentioned, in that was in my musician days, but in the beginning of my musician days when I was playing in Blondie, I wrote a song called "The Mobius Touched by Your Presence, Dear," which was about sort of mutual dreams, shared dreaming I was having with my girlfriend at the time, and telepathic sort of experiences. And this book the beginning of the book starts kind of at like the next kind of step in that, when I started basically recording my dreams all the time and discovering that actually bits and pieces of the future started turning up in them.
And one of the things you point out is that you're in effect repeating an experiment that was very famous going back to the 1920s.
Yes. How this all happened was, I say in the book, and as I've said in other books and in other interviews, I got interested in all this stuff that I write about now, or have been writing about for quite some time. When I was living in New York, playing in the then absolutely unknown Blondie in the mid-1970s, and I was living on the Bowery with Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, singer and guitarist, and I got into all the stuff I'm writing about now then. There was a milieu where people were interested in Aleister Crowley and magic and all that, and it was also a kind of renaissance in terms of publishing, because there was lots and lots of out of print or public domain books that were coming out, and so they were available in cheap editions, and so I just totally plunged into it. And in the midst of all that, one of the things that happened was I was on tour, sort of the first Blondie tour of the States. My girlfriend and I at the time, we discovered that we sort of sharing similar elements in dreams, and then when we wanted to call each other, we wound up doing it. And it was like, it wasn't, we didn't have mobile phones back then. So it was like you had to go out of your way, to go to the phone box to make a call, or at the hotel and all this kind of thing. So when I came back from that tour, I wrote a song, Always Purchased by Your Presence, Dear, and then it became this big hit here back in the day, a long time ago. And then subsequent to that, I kept reading and reading and reading. One of the books I read was a book called An Experiment with Time that came out, as you say, in the 1920s, and it was by a fellow named J.W. Dunne, who was not an occultist, wasn't a mystic, not a psychologist. He was an aeronautic engineer, but he discovered just by chance that he dreamed the future.
He recorded his dreams.
This is how he tells it in this book, is that he he had a dream in which he was arguing with somebody about what time it was. And he said it was 4:30, and the fellow in the dream said, no, it wasn't. And he said, yes, it is, and I'll prove it. And he went into his pocket and pulled out his pocket watch, and the pocket watch said it was 4:30. And then he woke up. And then he wondered, oh, gee, I had this strange dream. I wonder, blah, blah, blah. So he went over, he looked for his watch, and he picked his watch up. This is back in his old pocket watch. This is like 1890s or something like that. And this is like, he's writing about it many years after it happened. His watch in that time, waking life, said 4:30. He thought that it had stopped earlier in the day, and he had forgot to wind it. So he wound it then, thinking, well, when I get up, I'll have to fix it to the right time. Went back to sleep. When he woke up, picked up his watch, lo and behold, it was at the right time. So in his dream, he told somebody it was 4:30. He woke up, it was 4:30. His watch had stopped at 4:30 because when he wound it, it was the right time when he woke up. So Dunn thought, oh, that's odd. And then he had other dreams. He dreamt of seeing soldiers from the Boer War. This is, again, back in that time, marching up from the South Africa up towards Cairo, up towards the north. And he encountered them, and he said something like, why would you guys do something like this? And they explained, well, this is what we're doing. We're coming from the south up to the north. And then the next day, he read in the newspaper about, from the Cape to Cairo, this famous expedition, which is exactly what the soldiers in his dream were telling him we're doing. And then the most famous or the most striking dream that Dunn had was he dreamt that he was on an island, and fissures were opening up and steam was coming out. He realized there was going to be a volcanic eruption, and he was trying to get the French officials who were running the island, to pay attention to him because they had to get everybody off the island and so on and so on. And then he later realized that he had dreamt what he had read in the newspaper about the island Martinique that had, exploded in a famous, Krakatoa-like, as we would say today, volcanic explosion. And the interesting thing that Dunn came to see was that he wasn't like hovering over the future, like Nostradamus or Blackwell predicts or something like that. It was his specific future, what he would see in the newspaper. And that was the odd thing for him. And then he came to understand that first he thought this was some strange thing that happened to him. He thought he had some weird anomaly. But then by chance he discovered that others had the same phenomena happening. And he realized that this was something that's actually common to our experience. And then he developed a strange philosophy about it called serialism that we can take or leave. But that was my kind of starting point. He said, this happens to everybody, really, and don't take my word for it. Record your dreams. And I did, and lo and behold, he was right.
As I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, he also tried to match dreams with past events, which many people think dreams are a way we digest the past. And he found that the dreams were just as good at predicting future events as they were at describing past events. It was about equal.
Well, yeah, see, he developed this notion called serialism, and these different sort of times. There's time 1, time 2, time 3. Unfortunately, it winds up into an unending kind of, infinite regress, and he has to actually call in some kind of ultimate observer and that kind of thing, which is not particularly satisfying. But we don't have to really take, Dunn's serialism swallow it whole. We can just sort of, follow his example and write down our dreams. But the thing about the past and future is that time 1 is us every day, nose to the present, dealing with everything. And then there's a very palpable present. There's the past that does, earlier today, we weren't having this conversation, right? Later on this evening, it'll be over and we won't be having it. Okay. That's our everyday kind of experience. But in this time 2, that Dunn posits in the dream world, our consciousness, which is no longer anchored to the brain is fixed to the present moment. And he doesn't mention Bergson, but this is something that the philosopher Henri Bergson talked about too, and in a similar way. When in the dream state, in time 2, we hover over some kind of time, which is both the past and the future at the same time. And so that's many ways our dreams have a mixture of the both sort of thing. And if you only look at dreams, let's say, from a cause and effect, point of view. That happened yesterday, and so I had that dream about it. You won't notice the kind of, well, this hasn't happened yet, but I dreamt about it, which you only notice if you bother to write your dreams down and do it over time and pay attention to what happens in your daily life.
And that's what you discovered looking at your own dream journal, that there were many precognitive dreams that if you hadn't reviewed the dream journal, you wouldn't have been aware of.
Well, that was exactly it. I mean, that's the central thing. I mean, it sounds rather banal and anticlimactic, but the main thing is just to bother to write your dreams down and pay attention to them. Don't worry about interpreting them. I mean, you can do that if you want, and many people write their dreams down, but it's not about interpreting your dreams. I mean, you can do that. Dunn doesn't do that. He gives no evidence. I think he may mention Freud here or there, but he doesn't have, he's not really into dream interpretation or Jung or anything like that. For him, it's more about time. He came up with the whole philosophy of time and all that, and ultimately a philosophy that we are fundamentally immortal and so on and that sort of thing. So the dreams were a vehicle for him to that kind of time philosophy. I mean, I found pretty much as soon as I started writing them down that he was right. It was remarkable. And I say in the book, the very first one that I remember is that this is back 1980. I was living in New York and I was a musician then. And I dreamt that I was playing a red guitar. I didn't have one. I didn't know anyone who had one. Met up with a friend, walked around, whatever. And by chance, we wound up at a friend of a friend of a friend's flat. And the guy said, "Hey, check this out." And he handed me a red guitar. I don't remember what the heck it was. Probably a Fender of some kind. And then at some point I realized, oh, wow, this is the dream. And then the next one was even better. It was a woman that I would have wanted to be quite intimate with and hadn't yet. And I dreamt that it happened. And as I say in the book, I chalked that one up to Freudian wish fulfillment. But then again, through a chance encounter, I wound up in the intimate situation and that I had dreamt of with the woman in question. And again, it was like, whoa, wow, okay, how did I know this in advance? And that just started, it just kept going. And again, in a way I feel embarrassed because I don't necessarily want to draw attention to myself. I dream the future, but it just was the case. And there's just so many of them, that I write about quite a few of them in the book, but there's many, 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 many more in the journals that I didn't get to.
Well, it's interesting that J.W. Dunne had a significant impact in his own day. As you point out, he was friends with H.G. Wells, the author of The Time Machine.
Oh, absolutely. And Wells and also J.B. Priestley, who's not as well known, but Priestley was a very famous writer here in the 20th century. And both Wells and Priestley sort of used Dunne's ideas in their books. I mean, not in The Time Machine, which is the time travel book that's, well, most people know, and Wells is one of his most famous works. And there's like it's kind of real physical kind of going into time, and the machine moves into time as the fourth dimension in some kind of way. But there's a later book of Wells's that was made into a film in the 1930s called The Shape of Things to Come. And it's one of his future histories, which is sort of like the Time Machine is a future history too. I mean, basically it's like Wells's vision of what's going to happen. But in The Shape of Things to Come, the main character, insofar as there is one in the book, is called Philip Raven. But he's someone who we find his diary, and he's read Dunne's book, and he's experimented with it. And whereas Dunne is, he's dreaming about what he's going to read in the newspaper tomorrow or the next day or the day after. Philip Raven is dreaming about what is going to happen, centuries forward. And it's the kind of future history that people like Olaf Stapleton and other kind of science fiction writers picked up on. But no, I mean, Wells knew Dunne. And then I said with Priestley's wrote these time plays. He's probably better known in the UK than in America, but he a play called Time and the Conways and I Have Been Here Before. Priestley was always was also very influenced by P.D. Ouspensky's ideas about six-dimensional time and eternal recurrence. So, I mean, these ideas filtered into the popular culture and all that. I mean, and today, I mean, if you go on Netflix or whatever streaming thing it is, the most popular thing has to be like time travel. There's so many time travel shows.
What's intriguing to me is we seem as modern people, so-called modern people, wow, we're discovering precognition, we're discovering the power of dreams. But as you point out, and virtually every dream researcher knows that this was taken for granted in ancient times.
Nothing is new as the old. I mean, our interest in dreams goes back very, very far. One of the interesting things I learned, although I've been reading about dreams, for a long time, already, but having to do sort of research for the book and focus on it, relearned or re-remembered is that, one of the earliest dreams, sort of collection of dreams, the Babylonian king Ashurbanipal goes back, ages and ages and ages. And among the dreams that were discovered among his libraries was also Gilgamesh, the earliest work of what we would call sort of literature in a very broad sense. And there's a real relation between the two. Literacy and dreaming come together in the sense that dreams, for the most part, are kind of these stories. They have characters, they have a narrative, there's a opening, there's a denouement, and things of that sort. Our interest in them is one of these things we've been fascinated with them ever since we can even think about them. And it's only fairly recently, like so many things, and you know this, Jeffrey, and your listeners do as well. Only fairly recently that the modern view is that, this is just, it's kind of nothing, just flotsam and jetsam of the brain, like getting rid of stuff. Or there's a German, phrase, Träumen sind Schaumen, like dreams are foam. Dreams are just kind of like bubbles of given off by the brain. And anyone who pays attention to their dreams, any length of time, and often, very soon into doing so, you realize there's an intelligence at work there. So it's not just kind of psychic rubbish we get rid of.
Now, I want to go back to a point you made about Ashurbanipal, the Sumerian king, if I understand it. When they uncovered the records in his palace, they discovered that in addition to the legend of Gilgamesh, and correct me if I'm wrong, he had basically saved thousands of years of records of the dreams, and I assume dreams of previous kings.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one of the things. There's a wonderful book by a Jungian psychologist, Anthony Stevens, called Primal Myth, if I'm not mistaken, where he goes into the history of dreams and history of dreaming. And he says that that's one of the earliest records of dreams were this cache of them found. And Ashurbanipal, who's I forget exactly what century, when he was 6 or 5 or something like that BC, he had collected from earlier, going back 2,000 years or something like that. So someone who basically, a very powerful person could do pretty much what they wanted. One of the things they wanted to do was hold on to these records of dreams going back for thousands of years. And I mean, I don't have to say, you have to be completely inured to the idea of any mystery of your own being to think that your dreams are just kind of psychic waste matter given off at different times. Not to say we know exactly what they are, but there's certainly something more than that.
Well, and you find, of course, in the Bible, Joseph and his dreams, the idea that dreams are precognitive. It was sort of part and parcel of one of the reasons they wanted to save these dreams.
Well, this was the thing. It was the whole idea that there was some knowledge, some wisdom, some information, as we would say today, that could be imparted in the dream, or was imparted in the dream, that was immediately available, and not always immediately available to the dreamer. And hence, Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream. And later, up until today, when we go to our therapists or dream seers to try and understand what they're about, and because they speak in a symbolic language, but as I try to show in the book, it's a symbolic language that's very much of the time and of the dreamer. So, well, you want to say that all those kind of, how should we say, off the rack dream interpretation books that say, well, if you dream about a cat, it means this, dream about that. I mean, it may have meant whatever they say it means at a certain time in a certain culture, but it doesn't necessarily going to mean the same thing for you, dreaming. But one of the things that does seem to be a kind of characteristic of dreams that's carried through different cultures is that they tell jokes. They plays on words and puns and things of that sort. Metaphor, but also kind of funny, not in the sense of trying to entertain, but it is a kind of way where they do sort of be able to communicate things in that way in the language. And this goes back to the Egyptians. And this was something that, in many ways, one of the things I point out in the book, what I discovered in doing the reading, is that some of the ways the Egyptians looked at dreams is some of the way Freud looked at them in the same way. And Freud, wrote famously about wit and humor in the unconscious and all that.
You also point out that one of the most interesting forms of precognitive dreaming, I think the term you used, or the term that's found in the literature, is prodromal dreaming, when people dream about their own physical health.
Yeah, this was something, again, practiced by the ancients. Your dreams could sort of foretell or show in advance changes in your health in some way. And this would be, again, it's a kind of precognitive dream. The doctor, the physician, would be able to, well, much like the therapist, where it's not maybe not so much your physical health, but your psychological one. Oh, if you're good at it, you have these dreams, and they may tell in advance what's on its way. They cast their shadows before them. But in this sense, it is actually physical. It's about your physical condition. And you could even say that, well, the ancients did believe that individual organs sort of dreamt. So your liver might have a dream and try to get something across to you, or your kidney or whatever, that kind of thing, and they would be able to read that. And this was something that's it's documented throughout history. I mean, I kind of do a potted little history of that in there, a section or two about that. But this is one of the the most how should we say it, commonly practiced approach to dreams in the early or ancient time.
In fact, I would put it even more strongly, the most commonly practiced form of medicine. Hippocrates himself taught in what was known in the ancient world as an Asclepion, a sleep temple. People came to the hospital and slept overnight, and their dreams were recorded.
Yeah, it was the whole idea of going and incubating. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the whole notion of incubation goes back to that, to dreaming. To you go and you go to the temple, Epidaurus or whoever it might have been, and you go through certain rituals of purification and fasting and a variety of other things that prepare you for this, and then you have a dream. Well, you sleep there hoping to have a dream in which either you're given some information about whatever it is that's troubling you, or the dream itself is, a relief from it.
Now, another aspect of your book is the way that dreams can reach into the past, sometimes the deep past, as well as the future.
Well, dreams and also our waking consciousness can do that. Because, one of the things I try to do in the book is, it starts out as I'm talking about my own experience with having these precognitive dreams over many years and a variety of different examples of them. But then as you say, it opens up into discussions of dreams in themselves and then time. So I didn't quite say it exactly in the book, but what I had in mind was like there are these two mysteries that seem to be coming together in this precognitive experience in dreams. So we have the mystery of dreams in the first place, which are strange whether they're precognitive or not. And then you have somehow this remarkable power of them to displace time, to sort of jump ahead a bit, but also go into the past. But I think in a general sense, this is one of the things, I mean, we kind of live in an information universe in a way, where this information is available to us in a variety of different forms. I mean, we all know about the information highway and the internet and that kind of thing. But I mean, more immediately in our own experience, our own consciousness. So in my dreams, I'm somehow having information about the future when I shouldn't have it. It hasn't happened yet. But then in other sorts of experiences, you can go into, well, I call them kind of time slips in the book, where, people have had, recorded experience, or they've gone back to the past in some way. And it's been a felt, not just they know it happened, they were there. And I mean, one of the ones I talk about, there's the historian Arnold Toynbee and his remarkable multi-volume study of history. It's just called that. But in one of the volumes, he talks about his inspiration for writing this enormous study of civilizations. And he talks about how once when he was in Greece, he was at the ruins of a city called Mistra, which was a famous city back in the medieval ancient days and so on and so on. But it had been overrun in the 19th century and had left as a ruin. But while he was there, he suddenly felt as if this massacre raid on the city was taking place. He was there. He was in the midst of it. He had somehow gone back into time like that. And he talks about other experiences. And there's one major one that he talks about when he's walking past Victoria Station when all of history opened up for him. And it was like a parade going by him. And, Toynbee he wasn't an occultist. He wasn't anybody into doing any of this weird kind of stuff. He was a, very, world famous historian and all that. So what I try to do with the book is a kind of gradient. There's what happens in dreams, and then it crosses over into our, waking state, and then our consciousness, I would say, has an ability to reach out of the present moment, into other times and places. And so I try to kind of move, into how that can happen in our everyday waking consciousness as well.
You report, for example, a dream you had, and of course you indicate there's no way you can empirically verify the validity of it, but at the emotional level, it felt very authentic to you, in which you had an encounter with Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, Jeff, I mean, yeah, that is one of the most remarkable dreams I've ever had. And I only mention it in the book. And in my actual journal, I go into detail about what took place in the dream. But I had to say that I felt that, and actually, years ago, when I was visiting Colin Wilson, I talked about him with this, and he said, it probably was Steiner. But I felt like Steiner came to me in this dream. And and this was a time when I was reading a lot of Steiner, before I wrote my book, but this was when I was working at this bookshop in Los Angeles called the Bodhi Tree, which was famous in its day as, metaphysical bookshop. And I was reading a lot of Steiner and blah, blah, blah. And I had this remarkable dream where I felt he had come to me and he was talking to me about something. And it was like deeply, powerfully moving. And I don't know how else to express it. And but it was one of the most remarkable dreams I've ever had. And I have to say, I've had other dreams in which I'm sitting on a bench in the Tuileries in Paris and I'm with somebody else, and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky are walking toward us, and we're both sort of saying, oh, God, I'm looking forward to talking to those guys, or something like that. So, I mean, the dreams are able to, this is one of the remarkable things about dreams. They're, put aside the precognitive side of them, they're able to create this reality that's sometimes more real, than we try to approach this with, virtual reality and HD TV and all that. But I've had dreams in which I call it the crackle of reality. It's like I could reach out and kind of grip it, and see the creases. So, I mean, what is that about? Why do we have brains? Forget about all the occult, mystical stuff. Why do you have a brain that can do something like that? And if it can, in sleep, create a reality that is just so remarkably strange, but at the same time real, what does it say about, the world that we say to be, this is the real one right now?
Gary, in our previous interviews, I know you have paid a lot of attention to the hypnagogic state, that sort of twilight state, right in between waking and sleeping, or waking and dreaming, and the importance of that state for many of the great mystics about whom you've written.
Yeah, I mean, the hypnagogic state seems to be one in which a variety of different paranormal, parapsychological, mystical, esoteric sorts of experiences take place. And as you say, many of the greats people I've written about, like Jung or Steiner or Swedenborg or Ouspensky, were practice hypnagogues. And hypnagogic, it's a word is made of two, Greek word, hypnos is sleep, and gogos is the guide that takes you into sleep. Some people split hairs over when you wake up. It's hypnopompic, so the pomp takes you up out of the sleep state. But basically, as you say, it's this intermediary, this liminal state, when we all experience it twice a day. And you can learn how to stay in it, and you can watch dreams take place. And it is a state in which precognitive events happen. I mean, Dunn himself records a few where he's trying to test, and he lies in bed and he puts himself into a drowsy kind of half sleep state, and he visualizes his watch or something. I forget exactly what it was, but he visualizes something, and then he checks it, and it was what he visualized and all that. So, I mean, these are things you can do, and see what happens. But the hypnagogic is something that, I mean, Jung, he developed a whole practice called active imagination out of his own kind of natural capacity for hypnagogia. And if you know his story, when he went through the breakup with Freud, he plunged into this, strange world of his unconscious and the archetypes and all that. He was having these waking dreams. And Swedenborg apparently was able to stay in that state for hours at an end. And it was in that state that he went to his journeys to heaven and hell and all of that sort of thing.
So the power of dreams can be accessed in different ways through journaling and through the practice of hypnagogia by the conscious mind.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's, in a way, it's always there too. How should we say it? I mean, if you want to think of it sort of, I mean, we're like this all the time, looking out that way. And, we never see the back of our heads, put it that way. And if you want to think of the back of our heads as the unconscious or the place where dreams come from, or all that activity is going on, that's sort of what we're trying to do in a way. And I would say it's our job in the sense that we're the conscious ego. We can understand what we need to do. All that it's there all the time. It's accessible all the time. You have to pay attention to it. And again, this is one of the things I found is that, I shouldn't even say it, because it's more of a who than an it or a what, in some way. It's hard to talk about it in the language we have. We talk about the unconscious, but whatever it is that one engages with when you do this, it's intelligent. And as I say in the book, again, one of the things I talk about in the book is my experiences with synchronicity as well. And with the I Ching. And just to say, I mean, the same sort of intelligence I found in dreams is the intelligence I found when, working with the I Ching, when how a book written, I don't know how many centuries ago, and a random throw of a coins can communicate to me something that's actually intelligent and apropos, not just broadly, oh yeah, that applies to everything, but very much spot on, as they say here. I don't know, but it does, and it has enough times for me to recognize that something's at work there. And I would say it's the same kind of intelligence that's at work in dreams.
There are a number of mysteries here, the mystery of dreams, the mystery of the very nature of intelligence, the mystery of time. Gary, this has been a delightful conversation. I'm thrilled to be able to bring you back once again to the New Thinking Aloud audience, and I'm very happy to let our viewers know that you and I plan a follow-up interview where we'll go into more depth about the nature of time itself and I think that will also include the more discussions about Jungian synchronicity and how it intersects with the nature of time.
Oh, absolutely. And I very much look forward to that.
Well, thank you very much for being with me today, Gary.
Once again, my pleasure, Jeffrey, and I look forward to following up.
And for those of you listening or watching, thank you for being with us. Thank you.